Welcome, everybody. We're going to take just a moment to make sure everybody is in our Zoom meeting. And before we get started, thank you so much for being here. Looks like we're having a few more people join our equity event tonight, and we are so excited to have you join us. We're going to get started in just 1 minute. Thank you for being here. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Faris Sabah, and I work as your county superintendent of schools, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our current equity series event, From Inclusion to Belonging, with a wonderful author and actor, James Brandon, and a panel of local students who are going to be sharing their stories. Me gustaría darles la bienvenida a todos. Gracias por acompañarnos. Es un placer darles la bienvenida a esta serie de equidad, de inclusión, a sentirse parte de nuestras escuelas. Tenemos a el presentador, un autor, James Brandon, y un grupo de estudiantes que van a compartir sus historias. This meeting is being recorded. Les decimos que esta junta se está siendo grabada. Please keep cameras off and microphones muted. Feel free to use the chat box to share your name, your pronouns, and your location. And we have Spanish translation. Tenemos una traductora, Jessica Serna Castañeda, que está disponible para ser intérprete al español y está en vivo. Si quiere escuchar esta presentación en español, les pedimos por favor que busquen el icono de un globo que está en la parte de abajo, en la parte inferior, y pueden cambiar con ese icono el idioma al español. Y con eso pueden escuchar toda la presentación en español. And I want to make sure we do have the interpretation window available there. So thank you again for joining us. We ask, this meeting includes students of all ages. We ask that we wanted you to know that you could use the chat to ask questions, to support and affirm what is being shared. You may chat with others in the meeting. But we please ask you to be respectful and be appropriate, knowing that there are students of all ages in the meeting. We're, again, grateful for your participation tonight. We'd like to start with a land acknowledgement, which is a tradition that we've had in place here at the County Office of Education to honor and show our respect for the land that we stand on, and for the peoples, the First Nation peoples that were here before us. And our land acknowledgement is as follows. The land on which we gather is the unceded territory of the Awaswa-speaking Yupi tribe. The Amamutsun tribal band, comprised of the descendants of the indigenous people taken to missions Santa Cruz and San Juan Bautista during Spanish colonization of the Central Coast, is today working hard to restore traditional stewardship practices on these lands and heal from historical trauma. Thank you for participating in this land acknowledgement with us. We'd like to take a moment to thank our partners, because we work with some amazing partners to support us, to work on behalf of our LGBTQ students, and we really have learned so much, we've grown so much, and we continue to advocate together to create safer schools, safer communities for everybody, and especially our LGBTQ plus students. And these partners include the members of the Santa Cruz County Office of Education LGBTQ plus task force, who meet on an ongoing basis to discuss issues, solutions, and ideas to serve our LGBTQ students. The Santa Cruz Diversity Center, one of the most amazing organizations in the country, our Queer Youth Task Force and Safe Schools Project for their collaboration. We have worked so much with these organizations and learned so much, again, to build stronger, better, safer schools. And of course, our keynote speaker, Brandon, we are so glad to have you, our amazing, wonderful student panel, and all of you who are here tonight to be a part of this conversation. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for being a part of this work and sharing the space. We're going to be working on a few items tonight. This is our agenda. We're starting off with our welcome and our grounding. We're going to look at some data that I'll be sharing from the California Healthy Kids Survey. We'll be talking about some key findings from our community, including work being conducted by the Santa Cruz County Office of Education LGBTQ+ Task Force. And we'll be hearing from Rob Darrow and Christy Danner and Celeste Gutierrez. And we will have then our featured speaker, James Brandon, with the title of the presentation is What is Inclusion? James Brandon is an actor and author of Ziggy Stardust and Me and the Edge of Being. And then we'll be hearing from our student panel. I have to tell you, this is something that I look forward to all year long. Our students are so inspiring and their stories are so powerful. And I'm so excited that we have students who are going to be sharing their experiences, their thoughts, their ideas. And I hope you find it as powerful as I do. And then we're going to have some conversation about exploring belonging with James Brandon, Rob Darrow, and our student panel. And then we'll be closing our event at 7:30. So one of the most impactful things that I found when I started as working at the County Office of Education is looking at the data and what the data is telling us. And our LGBTQ+ students, their experiences are not always shared, or we're not able as a system to hear their voices in many ways because of the fact that many students feel unsafe and unable to express themselves in certain spaces and in our schools sometimes. And obviously this is something we're working to change. And so getting information about what their experience is like, how they're feeling, how they're experiencing school and community life and life at home is sometimes challenging. And we also wanted to know what the experience has been for our students during COVID-19 crisis and the pandemic, and how they were impacted by the remote learning, the return to school. And one of the great sources of information that we get on our students' perspective is the California Healthy Kids Survey. Now, this is a survey that is administered usually every 2 years. It's administered only in certain grades, but there are elementary grades, middle school, and high school grades that it is administered, and it is administered at most of the schools in our county. It is an anonymous survey, and it allows for us it asks questions as, do you identify as LGBT? They don't use the Q in their acronym, but so lesbian, gay, bisexual, or identify as trans. And with that information, we're able to see what that group of students who identified as LGBT, how they identified in comparison to students who have not identified in one of those groups. And so that is very powerful because we're able to compare our LGBT students to their peers. And that information is powerful and many times sobering. One of the questions that we look at is, in the last 12 months, did you feel sad or helpless almost every day? Now you'll see that there's 2 bars here, and there's 3 different years. We look at this information. There's a 2017, 2019, and 2021, right in the middle of the COVID pandemic. And so 2019, that data was taken before the pandemic. 2021 was when we were returning from right around the time when we were returning to school after during the pandemic. And you'll notice that in the blue chart, students who identify as LGBT in comparison to students who don't identify as LGBT on the survey. And you'll see that the numbers are staggering. 63% of our students, then 64%, and then jumping to 72% of our students have answered in the affirmative to the question, in the last 12 months, did you feel sad or helpless almost every day? Compared to their peers, a lower number, still a very high number, but significantly, the number for our LGBT students is significantly higher. than their peers. And this is of such great concern, and just a reminder of how challenging the experience of our LGBTQ students has been, and especially in how it's increased as a result of the pandemic. In the next slide, the next question is, in the last 12 months, did you seriously consider attempting suicide? One of the most sobering and concerning moments in education is when it's really our worst nightmare, when a child considers taking their life, and we see that the numbers are also extremely high. Fortunately, there is a small dip, but that dip still shows us that in 2021, 36% of our LGBT students stated that they had seriously considered attempting suicide. Over a third of our students had seriously considered attempting suicide, significantly higher than their peers. Any number above zero would give us concern, but having a third of our students answering the affirmative to this question calls us to action. It tells us that we need to do more to support our students and wrap them with as much support as we possibly can. Finally, we ask, have you felt harassed or bullied because you were gay or lesbian or somebody thought you were? And we see that for our students who identify as LGBT, again, a third of our students are experiencing this on an ongoing basis. At least, actually, the question is one or more times in the last year. And over a third of our students have experienced it at least one time where they're being harassed or bullied. And again, a call to us to continue our work to build safer schools for our students. You'll notice at the bottom of the slide we mentioned that this is coming from the Healthy Kids Survey. And also there's a link there at dataportal.santacruzcoe.org. You're able to go to that website. It's our portal here at the County Office of Education, and interact with this data. You're able to select different groups and to see how those students answer the same questions. And you can compare students based on ethnicity and race. You could look at it by gender. You could look at it, in this case, by students who identify as LGBT and not LGBT, and a variety of other ways. An equity lens to understand how our students are experiencing school and other experiences differently from each other. You can also look at different school districts and also compare them to the countywide numbers as well. When looking at students who are experiencing violence in the past 12 months, you'll see that students who identify as gay and lesbian are experiencing violence at sometimes double the rate of their peers, being pushed, being made fun of, being threatened, being in physical fights. Again, a reminder that we need to continue our work to make our schools safer, and for all students, and especially our LGBT students who are experiencing more acts of violence than their peers. And at this point, I'd like to welcome some special guests. We have Christy Danner, who's a vice principal at Scotts Valley High School, Celeste Gutierrez, who's our coordinator for student leadership and engagement here at the County Office of Education. And they're part of the task force, which meets monthly. We work on issues that come up. We work on solutions. We work on a variety of factors on behalf of our students in the LGBTQ community. And so welcome to Celeste and Christy, and Rob Darrow. I don't know if you're going to be a part of this as well, but you are welcome to join as well.
You covered it all. I was just going to comment that those statistics that Ferris shared earlier, one of the groups that looks at those and is hopefully making some progress is our LGBTQ task force throughout our county office. And Christy and Celeste are going to talk a little bit about their work. So I'll turn it over to them.
Hi, I think I'm up first, right? Awesome. Okay. So the LGBTQ task force was created kind of out of a need to create community and connection between educators. And we all have that same goal of making sure our students feel safe, supported, and included on our campuses. So that's kind of how we all came together. We all had that common goal. At first, we met and we talked about our experiences as educator allies, and created kind of a brave space for all of us to share our worries, our hopes, our passions around all these really important issues. As we continued through the years with the task force, some of the most impactful experiences for me, I know, and for many of our members, was been the introduction of the student panels in 2019. And pre-COVID, we had the incredible opportunity to invite students from all grade levels and all districts to share with us their own personal experiences identifying as an LGBTQ+ student on their own campus. And these panels just have really inspired and informed the task force goals and directions. For example, working to create teacher awareness and education around student pronouns and how to create safe and inclusive spaces in the classroom. The students told us that was important to them. So that's kind of what we started working on with them. The task force, I believe, has been responsible for working with every district on implementing gender neutral bathroom policies in schools, also informed by our students, and working with administrators to integrate LGBTQ+ curriculum, especially in history and health. Not only has the task force been a community to share ideas, but it has been an incubator that's created some strength in numbers around taking brave steps as a county toward caring and speaking for students that may not have felt they had a voice. The task force was really the first voice to express the importance of raising the rainbow flag at our school sites in celebration of Harvey Milk Day a couple of years ago. And I believe that our strength around this event and success around this event has really made an impact and has informed our new countywide heritage calendar, where we are all now together as a county and a community celebrating the entire month of October as LGBTQ+ History Month, which is not just seen by flying the flag, right? It's also seen in our classrooms, in our clubs, and our special events. So together with the support of our county leaders, I feel like the task force has really helped normalize these celebrations and curriculum, which is really exciting. So the task force has not only used personal experience and stories to inform us, but also important data. And I think you can go to the next slide. Important data through the Healthy Kids Survey, which Ferris actually mentioned already. We kind of scoured and compiled this data and shared it with school districts in ways that they can use it to create kind of best practices on their site. The task force has also developed a common website with student and teacher resources, which includes collaboration with school and public libraries to create a really incredible book list. So everyone should check that out. Another really great thing that the task force has been a part of is creating like this ongoing and deep partnership with the Diversity Center, with Safe Schools Project, with Queer Youth Task Force, and also the Queer Youth Leadership Award Program. And that has kind of made this experience more meaningful and richer in a lot of ways. Right now, the task force is working on some really critical things in our county and with school districts. The most important and special thing right now is creating this common gender affirmation plan across the county. So when a student walks into school and tells their counselor, teacher, or administrator that they've made the decision to identify with a different name or a different gender, it's creating that plan that everybody has. It's a common plan that tells our staff, our school staff, what steps they should take in order to make sure that student is never called by their dead name. So, clicking off, did I contact the yearbook? Did I contact the activities director? Did I contact the registrar? So making it a real clear, systematic plan on how to create a transition for that student. Wellness centers are also coming into our school district, and that's not a task force thing, but we're super excited about that because we're hoping that every district is going to be, maybe by next fall, having a new health and wellness center on their campus. And as Ferris mentioned, students that identify as LGBTQ+ need more health and wellness support. We know that from our Healthy Kids survey. So we're hoping to use these wellness centers as another place that students can feel supported and safe, and get the therapeutic intervention that they might need to be happier and healthy on our campuses. Also, the same lines as more, mental health, with the Health and Wellness Center, working with the Diversity Center to have a youth mental health professional there at all times. So students have access to somebody all the time. There's also a new countywide equity council that includes an LGBTQ+ subcommittee that's looking at data and really talking about actions that can help provide that safer and more inclusive space for students and their families, right, in our districts. So we have done so much, and we're super proud of everything we've done on the task force and continue to do. And so I know I'm proud to be a part of the task force, and I know everyone else is had such great experiences with Rob as our leader. So I think that's all I have to say. So I will introduce Celeste Gutierrez. So she's going to talk a little bit about student leadership and perspective around the task force, and take it away, Celeste.
Yes, thank you, Christine. Good afternoon, everyone. Celeste Gutierrez, Student Leadership and Engagement Coordinator here at the County Office of Education. To give you guys a little bit more context, the Queer and Trans Youth Council has been in existence. I don't know the exact date that it was created, and Q or Jensen will be able to share that. What I can share, though, is when we started this whole under Dr. Ferris Sabah about, really amplifying student voice, I recall having a conversation with Rob Darrow or Stewart. I can't remember who it was because it was in 2020, and that seems like it was 100 years ago. And they were like, hey, the work that you're doing with students, have you thought about, incorporating an LGBTQ component? And then that's when I was like, well, they shared how there's already a Queer and Trans Youth Council. So then they came and they became a part of the Youth-Led Leadership Alliance. So it's really one of 6 different student leadership groups that exist, and they're all listed on the screen now. And with every group, they choose a yearly project that they're going to work on. And this past year, the project that the students that were a part of the Queer and Trans Youth Council decided to work on is seeing if there was enough, just anecdotally, the students thought perhaps there wasn't enough gender neutral bathrooms at the school. So then they actually put it together a survey, had to go out to all the different schools and then gathered data. But the cool part about this was whenever the Youth-Led Leadership Alliance goes and presents to different conferences or different organizations, et cetera, about the work that they're doing, the Queer and Trans Youth Council always comes along, like they're a part of what we're doing. So with that being said, when they presented last year at the CIS conference, which is a statewide educator conference, there was actually an administrator from Santa Cruz City Schools who was there, Gail, and they had no idea that the survey was happening or that this was even a thing. So just, I bring this up to emphasize how important it is to be able to communicate what's going on. And I say this because what ended up happening, what the students learned through the survey is that although there are gender neutral bathrooms at all the schools, sometimes some students use them for non-bathroom related activities, which can be problematic for non-binary students to have a place to use the bathroom. The other thing that I wanted to emphasize is the cross-county community that's being built through this Youth-Led Leadership Alliance is really helping emphasize how important it is to students, regardless of what their passion is or what they're into, what school they go to, how important it is to be able to see people for who they are. Like I say this, what I mean is that it's easier, like the students are already on board, that it's like, it's easy. Every time we meet there, it's not something weird to be like, hi, my name is Celeste Gutierrez. I use she, her, ella pronouns. That's just common. It's a part of what we're doing and it's a part of who we are. And I say this because I know that this has been mentioned time and time again by students of how sometimes some educators like unknowingly out them to their parents because they perhaps don't know what's going on at home. Like for some students, and it varies from student to student, who they are able to be themselves at school and they can't really be themselves at home, and vice versa. So what I'm really wanting to emphasize is that it's important to really listen when young people are speaking. And if they're sharing with you like, hey, you know, I go by X and I like to use pronouns they, them, to really take that into consideration, that, you know, when you are communicating with them and you're around other people, to remember that and be thoughtful about it. And the other thing that I wanted to emphasize as well is each group, and the Queer and Trans Youth Council does this as well, is very solutions oriented. They notice like what gaps are in the system, and then they really want to address them head on, which is pretty rad. If you could go to the next slide, I just want to make sure that people are able to see thank you, Rob. This is actually what the findings were of the student survey. So the students created the survey. They're the ones that analyzed it, put it together, and you can see what the results were of that survey. I think the work that the students are doing is incredible. And I really, you know, encourage everyone who's here and wants to be a part of this and like helping amplify student voice to, you know, if you know of a young person who has, you know, something to say, to really listen to what they're saying and to affirm them as well. Now I feel like I'm just talking. So I am going to pass it over to Rob. Thanks, Rob.
As an outgrowth of the Queer, Trans, and Youth Council and the County LGBTQ plus task force, one of the needs that's been voiced is the importance of curriculum. So on the next slide, we're going to put the link in the chat as well, is the LGBTQ plus History Month curriculum resources. So if you're a teacher, or you know a teacher, or you're just a parent at home that wants to learn more about LGBTQ plus history, or share it with your students, your own children, the resources are all here. And it's so first I want you to be aware that we have these resources for October, which is LGBTQ plus History Month, and that we have other curriculum resources through the county office. All the teachers across the county have contributed to this, and we've simply put it together in one place so that it's easily accessible. The other thing we've done in the last 6 months is create this top 40 LGBTQ plus book list, which you'll see on the next slide, just a sampling of some of the books, and we'll put the link to the overall list in the chat as well for those of you who are interested in it. Since we chose this book list, I can say that I've read about 80% of these books, from the picture books to the high school books, and I can tell you every one of these books has a wonderful story to share in such a positive, affirming way. And you're going to meet Q a little bit later, but Q started what he called the Purple Sticker Project 3 years ago to highlight great queer literature in our school libraries and other places as well. And as an outgrowth of that, we put together this list of books for everybody to look at. And so again, I would encourage any of you to reach out and pull any of these books for any grade level, kindergarten through 20. As part of this town hall webinar tonight, we wanted to find an author of one of these books. And fortunately, we discovered that James Brandon actually doesn't live too far from where we all live. We are in Santa Cruz County, and James lives over in Monterey County. But he wrote the book Ziggy, Stardust, and Me. I reached out to a number of authors and was delighted to learn that he's not too far. And so we invited him to be our keynote speaker tonight. So just as a quick intro for Brandon, I've had the good fortune of talking to him a couple times over the last several weeks. On the next slide, it'll give you the background of who he is. He's an author, an actor, and producer. He'd written the book Ziggy, Stardust, and Me, and then I discovered he just had this new book coming out, The Edge of Being, that just came out last week. And I'm already working my way through that book. So I just want to say to all of you, all these books are great, but Brandon's each have a special connection to us in California and in lots of other ways. His novel Ziggy, Stardust, and Me was the debut, and then he's got this new one called The Edge of Being, which integrates LGBTQ history in it. And I'm just so pleased to have Brandon join us here tonight. And I'll turn it over to Brandon, and thank you for being here and for all that you're going to share with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It is a true honor, and thank you for the intro. And I've already met some of the student panel, and I'm truly impressed with what's happening in the work you're doing. So it's my honor to be here. Thank you. And as you'll see up on the screen, we'll just dive right in. You know, this is about inclusion. And I have to say that this seminar so far is about as inclusive as it can be. It is the very definition of what I found to be the definition of inclusion. And it's a beautiful thing that you have established here. And it's just going to keep evolving and growing. And I think is an incredible asset for, especially for queer youth, and moving us forward to a brighter understanding of including people, but also to a sense of belonging, which we'll talk about later. But this particular definition that I found is a very clinical one, isn't it? Because it's talking about what needs to happen as a foundation for institutional safety, basically. So with government institution, with workplace institution, with school institution, this idea of inclusion is the foundation. It's like if you're building a house, this foundation needs to be about inclusion first, for everything else to be built up on top of it. Without it, we have nothing. We can hold on to nothing. And I can speak directly to that because I'm a proud Gen Xer. I was a child of the 80s and went to high school in the 90s. And the idea of inclusion, this conversation that we're having right now, was so foreign to me. It never existed. It was never a part of my reality. So the fact that we're having it now is important part of the discussion to be having, but also is a reflection of the fact that it did not exist for me. And I have to say that queer folks, especially queer youth, we really have to forge our own paths in this life. We have to really learn to trust our instincts, to follow our hearts. And that takes time and work, because we've been writing our own guidebook in this life for generations, to be honest, because we've lived in a white patriarchal heteronormative society. So to forge our own path, we've had to do some incredible things in history to make that possible. And that's the kind of things I'm going to be talking about tonight when we dive into my backstory and everything else I'm doing. So to show you first, like how not included I was in my life, I'm going to tell you, here I am. This was me growing up in St. Louis, and I can't hear or see anybody, but when I do this presentation at schools, this is where I start hearing tittering in the audience, and that's okay. My partner makes fun of this photo all the time, and I'm very okay with that. I used a ton of Aquanet hairspray for that hair, by the way, and when I would walk down the halls, people would literally touch my hair and say, ouch, because it was like porcupine needles on my head, but I was very proud of that hair. I digress, but I see this young boy who is actually very shy, very isolated, very full of shame, to be honest, because I grew up in a part of the country that is very conservative and Catholic. That was my home. People are familiar with the Arch. My great uncle was actually the only photographer allowed to take photos of the building of the Arch. And as you'll see, I don't know, it's kind of hard to see, but that top photo, there's his name is kind of written on top. That's him standing on top of the Arch as the last piece is being put in. And I share that because my family is embedded generationally into this conservatism, Catholicism world. It's what I grew up with. And so the idea of any sort of inclusion was non-existent. Any idea I've had of being LGBTQIA plus of any sort was fire and brimstone. Basically, it was a sin. That's what my priest always told me. So if I had any of those feelings, I had to say like 10 Hail Marys or whatever I was given and release my sin. Any sort of representation of LGBTQI plus folks was all negative. Any sort of representation, TV, film, books, anything. There was nothing for me to hold on to in a positive way. And a perfect example of that was like when I was in health class, right? The boys and girls were separated, and in one health class, I was with all the boys, and we're hearing all of these feelings that we're supposed to be having for girls, feelings that I was not having. I didn't necessarily feel different. What happened in those moments when I was seeing everybody else have all these feelings and me not, I implanted this seed of shame within me. And I didn't know it at the time, obviously. I found out much later in life. But when I had that seed planted within me, it started festering and growing. And that shame clouded a lot of who I was in my childhood and through my teenage years, because I had nothing contextually to hold on to in the form of inclusion. It was not existent. And why this matters is because through a recent survey, a GLSEN survey, 1 in 5 queer students were taught positive representations of LGBTQ people in history or events in their schools, 1 in 5, and more than half of them couldn't even find information in their libraries. This is the piece that really matters in terms of inclusion, that although it is changing, and this seminar is representative of that. I've been all over the country, and I can tell you, there are a lot of people fighting this very fact to even have these kinds of things in libraries and schools. For instance, my book has been banned in several parts of the country simply because it deals with LGBTQ issues. And when we're censoring our identity, we're then not allowing a full discussion for someone who is in deep question about who they are to explore that part of themselves. And in turn, that seed of shame festers within. The one thing I did know growing up in St. Louis was that I had to leave. I knew that for a fact. I knew it was my only way of survival. So I did that. And one of the actual ways I started to find myself in a sense of belonging in the world was through the theater. In high school, I started joining theater, and it was the first time I actually felt like, oh, this is where the misfits go, this is where outcasts go, right? Like we started to find each other there. And so I knew I wanted to become an actor. It was like the thing I just had to do. So I moved to LA. And I became an actor. And the first 10 years or so of my career, I had bit parts in Hollywood, TV, film, commercials, that kind of thing. But after a while, I just started to feel very, very unconnected, disconnected from self even further, because nothing was fulfilling me. So on the day, literally on the day, I decided I was going to quit acting. My friend brought me the script of Corpus Christi, which you see up on the screen now, and said, I really want you to do this play. Would you do it? After some hemming and hawing and back and forth, I will say, I listened to my heart. There was something within me that was like, do this. That something feels right about this. And I did. And I'll tell you real briefly what this play is about. Corpus Christi is Terrence McNally's play. It's titled The Gay Jesus Play, right? And it's told through the lens of a young gay man growing up in Corpus Christi, Texas, but it's the passion story that people know in the Christian Catholic community and others, that it tells Jesus from nativity to crucifixion, but told to and from gay queer folks, basically. So basically what it was doing was bringing people who had felt ousted from their table of faith back to the table of faith that they were thrown out of, right? And what I realized in this journey, so this play that we were going to do, it was meant to be 6 performances, ended up being 10 years of my life, touring all around the world. And the reason why that happened is because of the audiences we met. They were seeing themselves finally reclaiming a faith that they had felt disconnected from. And that to me became a huge theme in my life, reclamation and the meaning of reclamation. And through this journey, we not only started to learn about the reclamation of faith, we also met people who were really intensely against what we were doing, and walked through throngs of protesters many times on our journey. And, we literally just have to kind of put our blinders on, as many queer folks have had to do in history, and just take the sound of all of this hateful rhetoric being thrown at us and just mute it, right? It just becomes white noise, because the more we were focused on the simple path of telling the truth of the story, of the telling the truth of inclusion, the more we were able to just feel that sense of connection to self and that sense of belonging. And that's what this journey became. And along the way too, I met people from all walks of life, people I'd never even considered meeting before. And it opened it kind of burst my white gay cis male bubble, right? And suddenly I was meeting people who were a part of my community who I'd never met before. And I started learning about their ideas of reclamation. And I started to get a sense of the idea that suddenly I'm knowing all these people who were a part of different forms of our history, and I didn't know anything about our history. So what happened was, when I was on this play, one of the cast members actually brought me a podcast of This American Life called 81 Words. And she said, I think you'll really like this. And in it, we can go into the next slide. In it became the actual seed for my next book, Ziggy Stardust and Me. This podcast, this 81 Words, talked about how homosexuality, it was basically the 81 words in the DSM, which is that little book you see on the top of the screen, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. Basically, it's a big book of mental disorders that all the psychologists refer to when they're diagnosing someone. And homosexuality was in there. It was the 81 words describing to some, long language way about how homosexuality is a mental illness. This is something I knew nothing about. And again, it was the spark within me that it kind of started to break away some of that shame and actually made me feel this sense of anger and frustration that we weren't taught anything in high school about our queer history, that there are all of these moments that I knew nothing about, that had I known, I might have felt some sort of different sense of connection to self, because I realized that there are more people that came before me that actually brought some great change to the world. And this was one of those moments. And it inspired the story of Ziggy Stardust and Me. So basically what this story is about, Jonathan Collins, who's 16 years old, is going through some aversion therapy treatments to kind of cure himself of his mental illness. And what you'll see on the screen here is the kind of aversion therapy that he was subjected to. Now, I interviewed a bunch of folks for the book who actually went through these treatments. And it's hard to really actually have caught up with words, because it's as I think about the things they shared with me, they were barbaric, and I'll explain what happened. Basically, this box you see there, full of knobs and different electrical components, there were 4 different wires that came out of that box with leather straps on each end of the wire. 2 of those straps were put on the thighs of the patient, and the other 2 were put on the wrist. On the bottom of the screen, you'll see a slide projector and a slide. So basically, there was a slide projector behind the patient, and in front of them was the screen projecting different images. In this case, because Jonathan identifies as a young gay boy, he was subjected to these pictures. So when the first picture would show up, it would be, for instance, a girl in a bikini lounging on the beach, and everything would be fine. And then the next picture would come through, and that woman would be replaced with a man in a bikini on a beach lounging, maybe provocatively. And in that moment, electrical wires would zap to life and singe the thighs and the wrists. Because the idea being, for aversion therapy treatments, you associated pain when you felt some arousal, when you felt feelings that you quote unquote weren't supposed to be feeling. And the idea being, when you associated pain with that, you would no longer feel those feelings. Now, of course, these treatments are absolutely barbaric. They were just archaic at the same time, but they were very real. And the people that went through them are still, this was 50 years ago, still suffering the consequences of that. So in the next slide, you'll see what was happening at the time, where these 2 factions were fighting each other. And you have the Gay Liberation Front, which in 1973 was just gaining steam. And because they were really influenced by the civil rights movement, by the women's lib movement, by Vietnam protesters, by American Indian movement. And they decided that we're going to fight the APA, the American Psychiatric Association. And over that summer, they went to some conferences and kept storming them in these things they called zaps, where they would just like, it's kind of like those when you come all together and just take over a room, that's a zap. And they would do that in these conferences and say, we are not sick. We are not mentally ill, quit treating us as such. And then on the other hand, you have the psychiatrists who are saying, but this is what we know to do. This is in the book. We don't know any other way. And it wasn't until in the bottom of that picture of the screen, you'll see this picture. It wasn't until that summer of 1973, when this particular doctor, who's covered in a mask because he himself, he's a psychologist, he himself identified as gay, but was so scared to come out that he only agreed to talk if he had, and this is a Richard Nixon mask that he stretched out so that no one could recognize him. He called himself Dr. Anonymous, and we have since learned his name is Dr. John Fryer, and he's a pioneer whose name we should always remember. But he came out and said, we need to make this change. Being gay is normal, it is not sick, and we need to have a real conversation about how to make this change in this big DSM manual. And so on December 15th, 1973, this is the kind of headline that was thrust all over the country. Suddenly, every person who identified as queer was cured, right? This was a moment I knew absolutely nothing about. And what I realized is that when we get into the idea of understanding history, what I realized is this very much, this moment right here, when we changed the DSM, we established for the first time, I feel, the idea of inclusion, because we were no longer considered second or other than. We were considered an equal part of our society. We were no longer, just for loving who we love, we were no longer considered ill, right? Because here's the thing. The fact that we know any kind of history at all, people weren't allowed to come out. They were persecuted for being out, literally. So the fact that we can now have this established discussion that being LGBTQI+ is okay, is actually a sane experience, was the first time inclusion was established in our movement. And many say was the moment when it kind of created the modern LGBTQ movement as we know it today. And that was the impetus for Ziggy. And as we will talk now with the student panel, but as we move forward and move into the idea of belonging, it is also the impetus for my next book and subsequent books coming from that, is just exploring this idea of inclusion, belonging, and history, and how they're all interconnected.
Thanks, Brandon. As we bring in the student panel, if you could move to the next slide, so I'll introduce the students and then we can turn off the slides. But we've got 5 students from across the county to, first of all, share a little bit about who they are, and then to interact with Brandon as a response to his discussion. So you can see their names on the slides there. And let's, we can take off the slides and just spotlight all the students and myself and Brandon, and we'll have a little conversation here. Q, since I see you first, I'm going to have you introduce yourself first. I know the other students will be spotlighted here in just a minute, and then I'll have them introduce themselves as well. So Q, go ahead and get started.
Hi, my name is Q Licht. Thank you so much for having me. I'm a senior at Scotts Valley High School, and my pronouns are he, him. I'm a member of my school's Sexuality and Gender Acceptance Club. I was on the Queer and Trans Youth Council last year, and I am the founder and director of the Purple Sticker Project.
And Emery, how about you go next, since I see you're on, and hopefully all the students will turn on their cameras so we can bring you in.
Okay, my name is Emery. My pronouns are he, they. I go to Aptos High School. I'm a junior, and I'm part of the Rainbow Alliance at our school, which is like an LGBTQ group. And I'm also recently getting started in more LGBTQ activities. And yeah.
Great. And Jensen?
My name's Jensen. I am a senior at Santa Cruz High School. I am a member of the Santa Cruz Pride Committee. I'm a former member of the Queer and Trans Youth Council, and I'm a part of my school's Rainbow Alliance Club. And I'm happy that you guys are all here today.
And Gray.
Hello. My name is Greg. I use they, them pronouns. The past year, I've been doing a lot of work with educators at my school on how to respect trans and non-binary youth and really just how to interact. It could just, I think education is just really the root of everything, and you can't be inclusive without education. So I've really been focusing on that. I've also been a part of my school's Rainbow Alliance with Emory for the past year. And yeah, that's about that.
Great. And Aaron, I'll have you introduce yourself, and I'd invite all of you just to unmute because we're going to have a conversation here. We don't have to be clicking on and off. I think it should be fine. So Aaron, you're up.
Hi, my name's Erin. I'm a freshman at Watsonville High School, and this is my first year doing this panel, but I've been a panelist for multiple other panels, including ones for parents to understand queer and trans youth. I also was an awardee at the Queer Youth Leadership Award last year, and I helped plan this year's The Umbrella is Open for All summit.
Great. Well, I'm just so great that you are all here to join us tonight. And the first question is really, what's your reaction to what Brandon had to say about inclusion, and how do you feel, what makes you feel included at your school? So whoever wants to jump in, you can start that.
Is it okay if I start?
Go for it.
Okay. I really liked what he had to say about, like,
You can call him Brandon. That's what he goes by. Okay.
Brandon. What Brandon had to say about history, and because I didn't really feel comfortable coming out as like a queer person until I learned in my 7th grade history class about, like, there was this really small segment about LGBTQ plus history, and I think that's really important, and I'm really sorry that you had to go through that. But I think it's really cool that things have progressed, and yeah, that's all.
Other reactions?
Thank you so much for coming and speaking today. It's really inspiring to hear about your life and your books and your passions. And I relate to a lot of what you said as a young transgender person and an activist about forging our own paths as LGBTQ plus people, finding acceptance in communities like theater, and having to research our own community's history because it didn't used to be taught at school. And some of the things that have made me feel included on my school campus are LGBTQ plus inclusive curriculum. Specifically, I've had the pleasure of sitting in on a sophomore world studies class, and one of their textbooks this year is A Queer History of the United States for Young People. And
Wow.
just the fact that that's a thing and that there's a class set of these books in a teacher's classroom is so awesome to me and such a huge step forward.
So awesome. So awesome.
I think that's really great that you have that class set. I feel like just especially, I mean, seeing yourself represented in all like classes is really important. But I think history especially, just because you can kind of show like that people like us have existed throughout time and that it's not anything new, different, or weird. And it's like, I don't know, I feel like that we are a part of history. You know, we aren't just like hidden away or anything like that or anything new. We've existed, we've been a part of history, and we've made great change in this world.
Mm. And, you know, what's interesting about that point too is, you know, when people are quote unquote making history, they're not setting out to do that, right? Like there's no one who's out there saying in their moment in time saying, I'm going to make history today. They're literally doing it to survive. And that to me is the most inspiring part of learning about what these moments are about and where these people come from. They were literally fighting the system, the white patriarchal system, heteronormative system, and just saying enough is enough, I'm not going to take it anymore, and literally just surviving. And it is that kind of passion that created these moments that we are able to talk about today, right?
Yeah, Aaron and Emery, what do you think?
I think it's really inspiring to hear from someone older that has gone through some of the same issues that we may have or are still going through, as well as hearing how other things have either helped Brandon or like helped Brandon either find secureness and sanctuary in like a place that's very inclusive.
Are there things at your school that cause you to feel like you have sanctuary and are included?
I have a few teachers that have helped me so far with either being myself or helping me feel safer in my community. Like one of my teachers has given me the choice to either be with the girls or the boys, since I am non-binary, and it is a very difficult choice for me to make sometimes.
Great. And Emery, how about you? What makes you feel included at your school?
What makes me feel included? It's just the like basic, just being called my correct name and the correct pronouns, and just being respected.
Was there anything else that Brandon said that you want to react to?
Just how it was growing up. It was very similar for me because my family's Christian, and so like it's been wrong to be gay is what it is. And so it was like, when I was younger, I thought I was like, I knew I was trans, and so like I was just too scared to come out. I was ashamed because I thought these thoughts were wrong and how I shouldn't be thinking those. And so growing up, I learned more about it, and I learned how, like other people think like knew that they were transgender too, or knew they were gay, and like, and so it's just like, yeah.
Did any of the rest of you grow up feeling that way too? And if so, what was that like for you?
I didn't really know if it was right being part of the LGBTQ plus community or not, because I was also raised as a Christian and still am. And so I was very afraid to come out because I did not know if it was right or okay to be gay or who I am. And I think a lot of that fear was just me, but I know that it's hard for a lot of other people because my family was very accepting.
Yeah, I feel that way too. I didn't grow up in a religious household, but I went to a lot of like religious schools, and especially in my middle school, I was the only out kid there, and so it was definitely interesting, and it definitely makes you like question like how right it is. It's like if you've never hearing about it, there was no mention of like anything LGBTQ plus in our curriculum. None of the teachers were like, there were no out teachers or students. And so it's definitely kind of like a very isolating feeling. And so I think that's when I started to question like how right it is. But I think going to a public school and just like meeting other people, having it in the curriculum and stuff was really helpful to kind of see like that I'm not just like, one person, and that there's like a whole community out here.
I'm curious, just to, I'm just wondering, like, if you can pinpoint the moment when you first learned about the LGBTQ plus community, if there was something that you saw or read, or if you can define that moment for yourself where you're like, oh, that's me, I think, or something. Is there anything that comes to mind?
I growing up, I went through a K through 8 school. So my school was very accepting of the matter, and we had a GSA club. And I learned pretty young because one of the kids that was in my grade growing up, his mom is the advisor still of the GSA club there. So I was always around them, and I learned around like, I think I want to say second or third grade, which is good and young. I didn't really want to tell people because I was scared still, but I'm glad that I had the opportunity to learn about everything so young.
Yeah.
I had and have the great privilege of growing up with a very accepting community, very awesome and accepting parents, and my LGBT affirming Temple Bethel. And so I knew from a very young age that the LGBT community existed. I think one of the first weddings that my parents took me to when I was a little baby was a gay wedding. And I think I knew since like elementary school in an abstract sense that transgender people existed. But the moment that really made it real for me was when in middle school, I learned about someone my age in Santa Cruz County who had just come out as transgender. And I was like, wait, that's a thing that like people that I know can do. And I started to think, wait, I think that's me.
Wow. Oh, cool.
I personally grew up, one of my dad's coworkers, well, actually two coworkers, they were married and they were two women. So I was exposed to it, but my parents never talked about it. It was as if it was like a taboo thing, but they weren't Christian. They weren't very religious or anything. It was just, it wasn't talked about. So I didn't feel comfortable even thinking about being that, even though I never had an attraction to like males, and I never felt that way. But so part of me knew that, but I didn't know that like that meant that I was gay, because yeah. But over time, obviously my sexuality changed. Right now I have a boyfriend, but I didn't think I was able to even explore any of that because I was just stuck as a girl, and I was stuck as a cisgender heterosexual, and I just couldn't explore that. But I was able to have teachers in middle school. I had one teacher in 7th grade, and I learned about her and her wife, and I was really close with her. And since that like first day of school when I met her, I was able to really like think, maybe that's me. Like I can see that in my future. So yeah.
Wow.
Similar to Gray, I had my grandma had a company as I was growing up, and one of her workers was a gay female, and she was married to this one lady, and she would always stop by and actually drop things off and say hello and stuff. And I only learned a few years ago that they were actually married. It was never like spoken about or anything.
Wow. I love that.
Do any of you have any questions for Brandon about any of the things that he talked about?
What was it like finding interviewees for about like the conversion therapy process?
It's funny. See, I still trip on words when I talk about it because it was really heavy. I mean, you know, the things that we talk about in our community can be very heavy in general. But this was something that, because I didn't know anything about it, I've heard of conversion therapy. I did know about that, but I'd never heard of aversion therapy, which is what I write about in Ziggy and what Jonathan endures. And when I learned about that, I couldn't even believe that it existed. I mean, it just is so hard to even wrap your head around the fact that this was a real thing. So I have reached out through the GLBT Historical Society in San Francisco. I found some people that had gone through those treatments, and I interviewed them. And, you know, what I found most inspiring, I guess, about it was that even through that intense experience they went through, they still were able to find joy in their lives. Now, it's been 50 years, and, you know, I interviewed them, you know, several years ago now. They were still having side effects from those treatments. I mean, it's not something, I mean, and most of them endured them for years. And it's not something that, although they've worked through it, and they are now, some of them are in healthy relationships and homosexual relationships, or they still have those singes that they experience. So it was a little bit trauma to relive that with them, but there was also this release. There was a lot of tears that we shared. There was a lot of stories that we shared. And I feel like for both of us, when we would be talking to each other, there was a deep kind of healing that happened. It was like this timelessness of healing that happened, where you talk to someone from a different time and you feel that connection to them in that time. And that it kind of erases this idea of past, present, future. You know, you're that connected. And that was truly inspiring to me, but quite harrowing to hear their stories for sure.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I feel like a lot of these experiences, like they do feel like very timeless. And so I imagine it was like very powerful to connect with these people who even like 50 years ago, like shared similar thoughts and experiences to, you know, you in present day.
Yeah, exactly. And to just know that, you know, even before them, like some things they would say, you know, we had it easy. That's how they would frame it when I would talk to them. And for me to hear that, I'm like, that's insane that you think that way, because, you know, they're going through these awful treatments, but before them, you know, there were people that were literally like thrown in the hole and, you know, in jail and weren't seen for weeks, you know, because they were just happened to wear clothing that didn't match their biological sex, kind of thing, right? So you just start to see like everybody has their perspective. And, you know, even today, there are going to be things that 10, 20, 50 years from now, people would be like, you had to go through that? Like, hopefully that's the case. I mean, that's what we're hoping for. We move forward. But yeah, it's that timelessness that really struck me too.
Aaron or Gray, did you have a question or something you wanted to add?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I just wanted to like talk about like kind of what you were saying. I didn't want to ask again, but just what we were saying about like the history of queer people, because I was just doing research for Coming Out Day, and I was finding stuff even about like colonists that were being hung, or they would just be burned because they would dress in opposite clothing, or they would wear they would like be in intimate relationships with somebody that they weren't supposed to be with. So I just think it's really interesting how it's like it has been throughout the whole like all of these centuries, and we can still like, it seems almost as if like the homophobia has continued, but it's like it exponentially gets less. And I think that can really be seen as like we each tell each other our stories.
Yeah,
Exactly. I couldn't say that better. Part of what we're doing tonight, those who are listening in, I'll bet you didn't know you were getting an LGBTQ plus history lesson here, but between our students and our author, it's pretty awesome. Brandon talked about inclusion. We're going to have him talk a little bit about belonging now, which is the two words that we put together for this webinar. So Brandon, I'll turn it back over to you and ask the person with the slides to put the slides back up, and then our student panel will come back in afterwards.
great. I love that conversation, and truly like what was brought up is you really can't have the conversation about queer history without talking about colonization, because colonization, especially the white supremacy of our society, wiped out a lot of just the gender neutral and transgender and homosexual peoples that existed before they came. And that is a whole other topic to get into, but that was the thing I wanted to bring up at that moment. So we're going to shift now into the sense of belonging. And I found this definition that really struck me. For me, a sense of belonging is the deeper connection to self. So if inclusion is the foundation of the house that we are, our houses, like our temples, our persons, our houses, are, you know, those are the things that we respect and take care of. If the foundation of that is inclusion, which we can build upon our inner being, right? Belonging is that deeper sense of connection to self where joy can really exist. And in my entire thread of research that I've done, I've noticed one thing that kind of was this through line throughout history, that even amongst strife and struggle and intense hardship and harassment and everything else that we faced, the one thing that connected every little moment in history was queer joy. And to me, right now especially, that is the biggest form of resistance we as a community can hold, is queer joy. Because if we can just put our blinders up as much as we possibly can, and in a privileged world that is easy to do, and I understand that, and not everybody has the access to that experience, but if we can hold the space to disallow those voices of negativity to not affect us, but instead cultivate that creation of belonging within, that's where our real sense of empowerment can happen. And I am a firm believer that the way that we first develop a sense of belonging is through our LGBTQ plus history. This is why it is so important that it is taught in our high school curriculums, and even before that. Because when you, and we talked about this briefly, one of the panelists mentioned this, when you see yourself represented in history, especially at a time of deep question about your identity and what you want to do with your life and where you want to go and what you want to explore, when you see yourself as a part of something that was a creation of humanity from long ago, and you see that those people identified on the LGBTQI plus spectrum, when you see that, you recognize yourself in them, and you realize you are a bigger part of something that is far greater than what you see in this person right now. You're connected to a heritage, to a lineage, and that instills an innate sense of rootedness and connectedness to self that can't otherwise be taught or felt. That sense of belonging, if I had that in high school, I would have probably erased years of heartache and shame that I had to personally work through to get to the place I'm at today. And that's why I deeply encourage all schools to find a space for this in the curriculum, but that's also why it became an incredible passion for me to write that in my books. And that is, and I spent most of my time at the GLBT Historical Society, which you see here, researching both books, because here's the thing, I am a research geek. Like I love libraries. I'm obsessed with libraries, actually. I spend so much time there, and I'm a tangible person. Like I'm not a big online research person, although sometimes that's just what you have to do. But I'm, generally speaking, love to get my hands in the clay, right? And I love to flip through books and learn that way. And I decided, when I learned about going to the Historical Society, where you can actually go into the archives, it was like life-changing for me. And I highly, highly, highly recommend, if you have any access at all to your LGBTQ Historical Society in your community, and this one is in San Francisco, just a couple hours away, they're open where you can just go in and make an appointment for a couple hours and actually flip through scrapbooks that people have donated of pictures that they took in the 50s and 60s, or articles of clothing, or tapes that you can watch and listen to, or newspapers. And love letters. This one I'll never forget, and this was actually the inspiration for Ziggy. I found 2 love letters that these people wrote. They were 2 men. They wrote in secret to each other because they couldn't be out, and they were in 2 different parts of the country, and they'd mailed them to each other under pseudonyms because they didn't even want their names to be found out. And I found these letters, and it was like this kind of secret love affair that I was like witnessing unfold. And it was so beautiful and moving and heartbreaking, and made me feel just so grateful that I can love someone and have a beloved in my life and not be afraid of that in this world right now. And if you have the access to that, I highly recommend you doing that. But that was the impetus for my next book, which is The Edge of Being. The journey of learning about history and the journey of learning about a sense of belonging. So here on the cover is my protagonist, Isaac Griffin, who's 17 years old and months away from graduating from high school and has absolutely no idea what he wants to do with his life, which is, no one can relate to that, right? And beyond that, he also doesn't have a sense of belonging in the world. And he attributes all of this to the fact that he doesn't know who his father is. He's never met his father. So after a series of events unfolds, he discovers this kind of box of artifacts his father left behind in the attic, and goes on this quest to find who his dad is, and is taken to San Francisco to find this person. And along the way discovers this kind of treasure trove of queer history he knew nothing about before, and through which his dad was probably a part of. And what he discovered was just this enormous sense of connection to history, but also a deeper discovery he never even considered before, which was a connection to self. And that is the premise of the story. And basically what this it's a contemporary story, but the historical thread is through his dad's lens. And what I explored in this is the Compton's cafeteria riots. Now, I just want to back up and just say, we can keep this up, but I wanted to say that, I'd written Ziggy, and at the same time, when my agent sold Ziggy, she also sold a second book based on a paragraph premise of what I wanted to do. And it was basically just stating what the characters were, but also that there would be another moment in queer history I knew I was going to explore, but I literally had no idea what it was going to be. So after I'd written Ziggy, and it was in this editing phase, I was walking along with my friend Steve, who's in his, I think he's in his early 70s. We were walking through San Francisco, and he's often inspired me in these moments. We just have huge, long conversations about, our history, because he lived a lot of it. And I was asking him if he had any ideas what is the seed for what this next book could be. And literally, I'm not even kidding, I literally said that and looked down. We were walking through the Tenderloin in San Francisco. I looked down, and there was that plaque on the sidewalk. And this plaque, basically, as you'll see, and you can see, says that at this place, in this landmark, was the Compton's cafeteria once stood, where the first trans and queer riot in U.S. history happened. I knew nothing about this. This was 3 years prior to Stonewall. The world knows Stonewall, but have we ever talked about the moments that happened that led up to Stonewall? Things I hadn't even considered before. And this then became the seed for my next book. So what was happening at the time, in the next slide you'll see, is that Vanguard was the first queer youth-led organization in the US. And those top two pictures there show that they were basically helping the trans folks in the community, because the trans folks who lived in the Tenderloin were pretty much the outcast of the outcast. They were thrown aside, as can be often the case in many communities still to this day. And especially the Black and brown trans folks, who are the pillar, by the way, of our movement. And those are the people I honor in this book. But this Vanguard community came together, and a lot of these were the white, gay, cis male members of the community, who said that they just weren't going to stand by and let their trans friends be harassed and entrapped anymore. I mean, police harassment and entrapment was commonplace for these folks, right? They just got so used to the fact that they would be just walking down the street, and if a cop was having a bad day, bam, they'd be thrown in the clink or whatever, right? Or like I said, they'd be thrown in the hole. And there would be instances where even if a trans woman had grown her hair out, the cop would throw her in the hole and cut her hair, literally. And, she'd be in solitary confinement for sometimes weeks, and this was the backstory for this time in our history. And the Vanguard organization had enough. No one was taking care of their streets in the Tenderloin, and no one was taking care of them. So they decided to have this street sweep protest, where you see they have these big brooms. They literally started cleaning the streets. And one of the signs that was often seen was, all the trash is before the brooms, meaning they're literally cleaning the trash off the streets, and anything behind that, all of us people, we're not the trash. We're actually the clean people here. We're the respectable people that you need to start honoring. And that was in the July of 1966 is when that happened. And a month later, this was all brewing, right, in the summer of 1966. A month later, they all went to Compton's cafeteria, because at night, that's how they were accounted for. Most people, worked the streets. They couldn't get jobs. A lot of trans folks couldn't get jobs because they were either wore clothing that was too effeminate for them or too masculine for them. And every time they got a job, like at Woolworths or, at JCPenney's or whatever, they'd get fired, because it was mostly white old women would call them out and say, we don't want that person working on here. And so the only way they could really survive was sex workers, to be sex workers. And so the home, their street was their home. And so to be accounted for, they actually met up at Compton's cafeteria to make sure everyone was safe. So that night, they were all there having their coffee and just hanging out. And a cop bolted in through the doors, grabbed a trans woman by her arm. And for no one knows why, it was just this culmination of everything happening, but she was done. And she threw that hot cup of coffee in his face. He scalded, he threw back, and literally all hell broke loose. People picked up whatever they could, started throwing things, knives, plates. They took sugar shakers and threw them through the windows and smashed the windows, went out into the nights and burned newsstands. And it was the first trans and queer riot that occurred in our history. And the interesting thing about it is that it was really never known up until just a couple decades ago. Dr. Susan Stryker, who worked at the GLBT Historical Society, uncovered it when she was archiving materials for their archives, and found this little blurb in a newspaper that mentioned something about newspapers stand burning and people fighting. And she started doing these interviews and started doing her own research and uncovered this entire moment in history, all of these details that I'm barely even touching the surface of, to realize, my God, this was it. This was the first moment that a trans woman fought back against police harassment. I highly recommend you watch her documentary, Screaming Queens. It's free on YouTube somewhere. I highly recommend that. But that was the impetus for me for this book, for this moment in history. And I'll just say to wrap it up for me, to go back to that awkward haircut and sweet little boy who was very isolated in St. Louis, I wrote these books for him. As I said, I had no context for any sense of belonging. I never felt like I belonged. I never felt different. I just never felt like I belonged. I didn't know what that meant. I hoped one day I would, but I didn't know how I would find that. And these books that I've written, I write for him. And for anyone who really has felt that they, haven't felt included or haven't felt belonged in the world, that this story, hopefully these stories and more like them, will bring you a deeper sense of connection to self and show you that inclusion is the base, but belonging is where you feel that sense of self-empowerment, where you can create great change in the world. And you, my beautiful student panel that I'm a part of, are definitely creating great change in the world. And it's an honor to share this space with you.
So Brandon, I want to just thank you on behalf of all of us about the insights you've shared about inclusion and about belonging. We'll bring our student panelists back in here to get their reactions. The next question related to all of this, students, you can respond to anything that Brandon said, but the other question that I'd ask you all to think about, and you can incorporate this into your final comments here, is when we think about our schools, what things are working and make us feel included and that we belong, and are there things that are not working so well as we think about the future and what we can all do here? So who'd like to start with that question?
I can start with this one. So one of the things that just in the past few weeks has made me feel really included on my school campus is that Scotts Valley High School is flying the pride flag this month for LGBTQ+ History Month, which is so cool. And I love seeing it every morning when I come to school up on the flagpole. And we also have our school library is decked out with pride stuff. There's a whole bunch of full-size pride flags all around the walls. I wish I had a better picture of it, but it is so cool. It's such a big symbol of acceptance and of belonging, and it really sends the message to me and other LGBT students, not just that this is meant to be a safe space for us, but that the authorities at school are on our side if someone tries to make it not a safe space for us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just such a powerful and cool thing at my school. Mm-hmm. And so something that I'd like to see happen in the county more, because Scotts Valley's doing pretty good at this, especially this year, is about all gender bathrooms. So a couple of people have mentioned that Jensen and I last year were on the Queer and Trans Youth Council, and our mission was to make all gender bathrooms more accessible to Santa Cruz County high school students. And so I can just give an overview of some of the main things that we found, and Jensen and I can go more into detail on any one of these points. We could be here all night, but we found that I think all of the high schools that we surveyed had an all gender bathroom, but that it was still lacking and still needed to be brought up to standard with California and state and national laws. That there has to be at least one student bathroom that's clearly labeled as all gender and for students. It has to be as available as the gendered bathrooms, locked and unlocked at the same time. It's got to have free menstrual products for students in accordance with the new Menstrual Equity for All Act. And it should have the same protective measures against inappropriate activity as the gendered bathrooms, which something that we found that was surprising to me was that issues stemmed from both over enforcement and under enforcement of rules in all gender bathrooms. For example, like over enforcement could be having a staff member constantly outside the all gender bathroom, making sure that people don't bring anything in there that they're not supposed to, but that leads to students feeling unsafe going into that bathroom. Or like for another hypothetical example of under enforcement, when the all gender bathrooms aren't cleaned as much as the gendered bathrooms, that can also lead to problems. But overall, I've seen so much improvement in the school district just in the 4 years that I've been at Scotts Valley High School, and I'm super excited to see what happens next.
Great. How are things at Watsonville High, Aaron? You want to talk a little bit about the things that work pretty well there, or the things that cause you to feel included and belonging?
On the topic of like books and stuff, we have my English teacher she gave us a lesson on banned books and why they may be banned and why they may be challenged or censored. And a portion of that was because of LGBTQ topics and such. And that's sad to hear, but she's also made it a safe place for students to read books if they want to, that aren't exactly just like straight and like not like LGBTQ topic books. And she recently handed me a book. Sadly, I already have it in my house and I've already read it, but I let someone else sitting next to me that I know is mature enough and won't, because she had an issue last year with someone writing on the cover of this book. Luckily, it's a cover that is easy to remove. Not easy to remove, but like you can remove substances and things from it. So she let someone borrow it, and I think that's really nice. We have books in our library that are very gender inclusive and also teach about topics. We do have a few all gendered bathrooms, although we only have one that is actually accessible during the day. And so that makes it really hard because my school's not all in the same area. It's very spread out. So if you want to use it, you have to walk to this one specific bathroom. The rest are locked because they are afraid that students may do things. I also we have times when our principal or give me a second to think about it. It happened the first week of school. I'm pretty sure we had a whole time of like talking about safety and stuff, and it included LGBTQ students. We also have a saga club, which is really good, and that helps me feel included in school.
I'm curious about Aptos High. Emery, you and Gray are both at Aptos High. What are one or two things that they're doing well there, or anything you think that could be improved?
I know that they have LGBTQ books at our school. And there's also a Rainbow Alliance group that's very helpful. They also have, but they only have one all gender bathroom, which is like, and our campus is big, so it's like really far away and it's kind of hard to get to and it takes a while. And that's the only one I know of. But every time I go into it, it's kind of a mess. And so that needs to be improved of.
Great. And Gray, any other thought you have about Aptos High?
I think that like since quarantine, we've done a lot of progress, especially since there have been a lot of student activists on our campus. We've made a lot of progress with teachers, particularly in just educating them on like how to, like even basic, like this is how you use someone's pronouns, like that we all think that that's basic, but somebody who doesn't know just might not know.
Yeah.
So I think that we made a lot of progress with that, even over like from this past school year to this school year. And again, I second the bathroom situation. It's not the best, but
something for us to all work on for sure.
Yeah.
So we've got about 1 more minute to go here. And Jensen and Q, I'll let you kind of share your final thoughts. You're the seniors here. So Jensen, I'll turn it over to you for the last minute here.
I just want to say thank you so much for coming, and it definitely means a lot that you guys are really trying to like learn about the change in the community, and just I feel like it's very inspiring to see how involved the community is, and to see role models such as Brandon and stuff like that, who are not only like succeeding in life but really willing to give back to the community and are using, you know, past hard experiences to like make that change and to ensure that like other children have like the opportunity to feel represented in media and don't necessarily have to go through the same hardships. So I'll turn it over to Q.
Thank you, Jensen. And thank you everyone so much for coming tonight and for listening to all of the presenters here. A lot of the stuff we've talked about today is so awesome and inspiring, and some of it is heartbreaking and encourages us to keep moving forward. And I'm so glad that all of you who came today are so committed to addressing supporting LGBTQ plus students in our school district. It's so inspiring. And I just wanted to say thank you and happy LGBTQ plus History Month.
For sure. And a final word from our superintendent, Ferris Sabah.
You're on mute, Ferris.
Thank you so much. Brandon, thank you so much for your powerful message. And students, I have to say, this panel has been absolutely amazing. You are inspiring. We are committed to continue to work as hard as we can to support you and other LGBTQ plus students in our schools. Thank you for being such powerful leaders and sharing your voices here tonight. You are an inspiration to all of us. Yeah. Thank you. And I'd like to wish everybody a good night. Thank you for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you at a future Equity Series event. Thanks, everybody.